So you've opened up Houdini for the very first time, and as is tradition with all 3D software, you're just bombarded with a lot of very intimidating and complicated looking icons. So a goal for today is to make sense of this all. And in general, the main thing that I want you to take away from all of this is that the best strategy is just ignoring a lot of stuff. Starting out in Houdini, it's a lot more important, first of all, to learn about different nodes and different workflows than to learn about what each and every button on the interface does. So for pretty much all of this course, you will need just a very small subset of the buttons that you're seeing here. And I want to start out, first of all, by ignoring all of this up here. These may look like very cute and colorful and inviting buttons, and maybe also like the tools that you're used to from, for example, Cinema 4D or Blender. But what these really are, and by the way, these are called chef tools, what these really are just presets in Houdini that build you node trees. If you, for example, want to create a smoke simulation, you may be laying down 5 different nodes, and if you're doing this each and every day, this might get old at some point. So these offer you a shortcut. But starting out, the node trees that get built by hitting one of these buttons up here are usually a bit overcomplicated and more intimidating than anything else, so for this course, we'll mostly ignore them. Next, let's look down here. Down here we have, of course, the timeline, since Houdini is an animation program. And again, on here I want you to ignore most of it. The few things that I don't want you to ignore are, for example, the play controls right here. And if you hover over them, you also see the right keyboard shortcut associated with them. And of course, down here you have your sequence and your sequence length, and you can change all of these 4 values to change the length of your sequence. And then lastly, 2 very important buttons down here. First of all, on this button right here in the bottom left, we have our global animation options, and in here I mainly want to make sure that you're using the right frames per second. In my case, I'm sticking to the standard 24. Let's close this, and the other thing that I want you to show in here is this clock symbol right here, because if this is turned on and I hit play on my timeline, my playhead moves along my timeline in real time. If I turn this clock symbol off, it will just move through my timeline as fast as possible, which is useful in some cases, but not all. So usually it's a good idea to just turn it on. So these are our mandatory things done. Now let's focus on the stuff that's really important here. And these are these 3 windows right here. This is, of course, a 3D scene view. This is our node editor, and these are the options, or as they're called in Houdini, the parameters for each node. Right now, all of this is awfully empty, so let's add some stuff to our scene. And since this is Houdini, it's usually the best idea to do this inside the node editor. So let's focus on this first. If I want to add an object here in my node editor, I can either right click or I can hit tab. And as a quick side note, the mouse position in Houdini matters for shortcuts. So if I right click in my 3D view, I get a different right click menu as if I right click in here, and the same goes, for example, for the tab key. Now with my mouse in here, let's hit the tab key, and for example, I could go into the create submenu and, for example, choose a box, or I can just simply start typing box, and I get the same option right here. So with my box in here selected, I can hit enter to get a ghosted view of my node, and I can finally left click somewhere in my node editor to drop it down. And now you can also see our box here has appeared in our 3D view. Let's maybe add a second object to a scene. Let's hit tab again and let's start typing again. And I want to bring in a test geometry, and the test geometry is the rubber toy. Again, let's hit enter. Again, let's click in our viewport, and now we have the rubber toy in our viewport as well. Let's for now make sure that we have our rubber toy selected, or the node of our rubber toy, which is indicated by this yellow border around this node. And I can change the yellow border by clicking on either node. Let's focus on our 3D view first, and let's first of all talk about the viewport navigation. First of all, I want you to make sure that in this left area right here, this left toolbar, we have our camera tool selected down here. And we go over these tools in a second. But for now, let's make sure you have this selected, and we can navigate our scene by, first of all, left clicking and dragging to tumble our camera, by middle clicking and dragging to pan or to move our camera, and by right-clicking and dragging to zoom in or out, or we can do the same thing by using a scroll wheel. If you navigate somewhere in your scene where you get lost and you don't know where your object is, you can always right-click and select Home All to get back to your objects. Now let's talk about this toolbar here on the left. And again, I want you to ignore most of it. The only two tools that we really want to focus on here in this course are, first of all, a camera tool that we used right now, and also this colorful tool right here in the middle, which is our handles tool. Let's select this, and what this gives us is controls that are specific to each node that I have selected here in my node editor. So with my test geometry selected, I have here a standard transform gizmo, and I can use it, for example, to move my rubber toy up and to rotate it. Now at some point you may want to adjust your view while you're in this handles tool, and of course you could just switch down here to the camera tool, but this is a bit tedious, so a much simpler way is, while being in the handles tool, hitting either Alt or spacebar, which will temporarily switch you inside the camera tool. So I can hit Alt and zoom out and adjust my camera right here. Now, what you may have noticed at this point is that while we're using a handles tool right here, there's also stuff changing inside the parameter field up here. So if I rotate my rubber toy, this value in here is changing. And what value is changing? Well, it's inside the rotate row, and it's in the middle column, which is the y-axis. So we're rotating around the y-axis. And if I want to enter a specific value in here, let's say 90 degrees, I of course can do this. So what you should take away at this point is that these three views here are linked. So if I, for example, change something in my 3D view in here, I'm also changing values inside my parameter editor. And if I change values inside my parameter editor, something in the 3D view changes. And of course, this is all depending on which node I have selected down here. So if I, for example, select the box node, I get new values up here in my parameter field. And also using the handles tool in my 3D view will change different parameters than on my test geometry. For now, let's reset all those values on the box to 0, 0, 0, and 0. And we're also pretty much done with the user interface in here. There's just a couple of small things that I want to show you. First of all, we have this toolbar here at the right, and these are just different visualizers for a viewport. So for example, we can take a look at each point, or we can highlight each point on our meshes, or we can take a look at the normals of each object. Or for example, we could even take a look at the indices of each point, which can actually be quite helpful when you're building procedural stuff. Also, depending on which tool you have selected right here, we have this bar at the top, and this gives us a few extra options for the node that we have selected. For example, if I select my rubber toy node, I can have a simple checkbox if I want a shader on this object or not. Above this toolbar right here, we have a few simple tools which are all shading related. For example, I can turn on my wireframe for my objects, or I can split my view, for example, into 4 views. If I want to view my scene through a different perspective, I can change this here, and I can set my view, for example, to the top viewport, or even to the UV viewport, which in this case gives me the UV coordinates for my rubber toy. And also, if I had a camera in my scene, I can look through the camera through this menu right here. One final addition to the UI. Of course, as with every 3D program, the UI in Houdini is freely configurable, and the area right here, wedged between the shelf tools up here and the timeline down here, is divided into panes and tabs. A pane is something like this, and this, and this, and a tab is something inside a pane, which is something like this, or this, or this. And of course, you can modify it like you want. For example, you can close tabs like this, or you can close whole panes by clicking on this small little triangle right here and saying close pane all tabs. And for example, what you will see me do quite often is close this parameter pane up here and just bring this parameter pane back inside the node editor by hitting P. So now we get a lot more room for our node tree. If you do change up the whole interface of Houdini, and you want to get back to the default, you can do this by going up here to the build area right here and go down to reload current desktop. And one thing you should notice here, reload current desktop is for some reason directly below save all desktops. So make absolutely sure you're hitting reload current desktop, not save all desktops. This will make it a lot harder to reset your view to the default. So let's hit reload current desktop, and a short while later we're back to the default. Also up here on this build menu we can also change to different presets of the Houdini UI. For example, we could change to the animate preset. We will get animation curve editor down here, but for now and for this course we'll just stay inside the build area or the build preset right here. So this is it for the user interface and the first part of this tutorial series. And in the next video, we'll look at the node editor down here.